Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it's just past midnight on Saturday, October the 19th, 2024. That makes this the news for Friday, October the 18th, day 969 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. Hey, Daryl Roberts, I see some of the peeps are coming in. How you guys doing tonight? Evening Mustafa, evening Parda, John Porter, Jonathan, PH, Richard Prexis, hey Van, hey Mel, Darlene, how you guys doing? Everybody's liking the live and sharing the live. Hey Pugga Mahone, hey Robbo. What's up? Well, that's why we're here, isn't it? Hey Jono, I'm doing okay, pal. There's our buddy Chris Carter. That reminds me, Chris. Tetiana. Who is Tetiana? I don't know who this person is, but Tetiana is the sponsor of tonight's live. She is supporting the trip to Venezia, and she very generously provided some support today. And so Tetiana is the sponsor of tonight's live, but I don't know what her TikTok handle is. I don't want to give out her last name. Hey, Anthony, I always appreciate your support. Thank you. So everybody, I don't know who to thank except to thank Tetiana. Hey, Cheyenne. Hey, Vanetta. Kilak. So, guys, we have an awful lot to talk about. And we'll begin, as we always do, with last night's missile and drone update. So let's take a look. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. It is just past midnight on Saturday, October the 19th, 2024, which makes this the news for Friday, October the 18th. Thanks, Sue Paris. Man, I'd love a Krispy Kreme. I'd give anything for a Krispy Kreme right now. Do we have to retake Crimea? Well, I don't know who we is. If you're a Ukrainian, that's up to you, right? It's only the Ukrainians can dictate the terms of Russian surrender in this conflict. And the rest of us should stay out of it except to support the Ukrainians in getting them to victory, in my opinion. Because we're not the ones that are bleeding and suffering and dying on the front line in the cause of democracy, in the face of this axis of evil, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. Let's be honest, right? All we're doing is not giving charity to Ukraine. Let's be clear, right? To quote Mark Rutte, the current Secretary General of NATO, it is not charity to Ukraine, but rather an investment in our own long-term security infrastructure. That's what we're doing here. We're safeguarding the future so that our children aren't the boots on the ground in Poland and Lithuania or Romania. There. Steve Thomas, that is a great question. We will talk about that in a second. Let's take a look at a couple of other top-line things today. Although maybe you're right. Maybe the North Korean story is the top line. But some other thing, but we've been talking about North Korea all week. So let's take a look at some of the things that happened today. Okay. So let's start with last night's missile and drone attacks. I slept like a baby. I swear to God, if there are drones in the sky, I sleep like a baby. If there aren't, I'm up all night. That seems to be the way that things are going these days, which is very disconcerting to me on a lot of levels. 135 Shaheds, many of them targeted at Kyiv itself. Apparently, it was a very busy night in the skies over this city. 80 out of the 135 were shot down. 44 were downed with electronic warfare. 2 were sent to Belarus and 1 to Romania, or 1 ended up in Romania anyway. That's a 92% interception rate on the part of the Ukrainians. Huge, huge. No ballistic missiles last night or cruise missiles that I'm aware of. Now, because of this attack, both Belarus and Romania had to scramble the fighters last night as these drones entered their airspace. Romanian jets were prepared to shoot down the drone that entered its airspace when it was lost to radar. We don't know what happened to that. It looks like it crashed somewhere in Romania. But to the best of my knowledge, the debris has not yet been found. This is as the NATO defense ministers meeting in Brussels wraps up today. After which, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, said that, quote, "Let me express solidarity with Romania." And he called on the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, NATO in Europe, and the Romanians for a quick and efficient response to this violation of airspace. He said, quote, "We have greatly increased our position on NATO's eastern flank and strengthened our air defense and policing of those threats." Now, you guys know I love that Dominic Nichols over on the Telegraph, Ukraine the Latest podcast, right? Love that Dominic Nichols. Dominic Nichols is a tanker, a British Army officer for decades who's turned journalist. And he had quite a rant. Now, he supported Secretary General's comments in general, but he went off, and it's today's Ukraine the Latest podcast. If you have a chance, give it a listen, because he says this much better than I'm going to repeat it from him. But Dominic Nichols went off. What is this threat, he asked. What is this flank? He said the comments appeared to express a position in a white void divorced from reality. Call it what it is. It's the front line with Russia, he said. Call the threat what the threat is. It is the threat of Russian aggression that we need to deal with. He went on to say something to the effect that he thought that that would focus minds and energy on the actual conflict that we are involved in, and not couched in this kind of political language. It was a great little speech he gave, and I cannot encourage people enough to listen to it. And again, Rutte closed that press briefing with the words, "It is not an act of charity, but rather an investment in our own future security." That's what Ukraine is. We spend $60 billion now, and we don't have to spend $1 trillion later on an enlarged war, which Russia seems intent on bringing to us. At this point, their economy is a war-based economy, and it appears that the continued expansion of that war is the only way that Russia is going to save itself. And so it is drawing North Korea in. According to South Korean intelligence today, they have confirmed that as many as 12,000 North Koreans are in Russia now receiving training. They have been formed into 4 brigades. Video emerged. Mel sent me video that was also published on the Invaders Must Die Telegram channel of North Korean soldiery dressed in Russian uniform. So now this is interesting to me because these are North Korean soldiers, but they are being outfitted in Russian uniform. I found that That's very interesting. But in all the videos that I've seen that are coming out of the Far East and showing us these North Koreans that are being trained for Russia, for the war in Russia, they're all dressed in Russian uniforms. I don't know. Are they contract soldiers? Are they mercenaries? Is there some way that North Korea, who thinks it owns its people, is avoiding saying that these are state-sponsored troops? I don't know the answer to that, but we'll keep our eyes on it. Now, somebody asked, what were the drones? And it seems as though the drones were mostly of the Shahed, or were entirely of the Shahed 131, 136 class. However, it is important to note that out in Tartaristan, the Russians have set up a factory where they are building, under license from the Iranians, their own versions of these drones. And legitimately, not all of those drones are attack drones. Reportedly, they come in 3 flavors. There's the classic Shahed attack drone with munitions. Then there is a paper airplane, basically. It's just a decoy, very cheaply made of rubber and plywood, and it's intended to exhaust air defense. So when we see, hold that thought, Melly, give me 1 second on that. When we see these waves of 135 drones coming in, we don't know how many of them are decoys. Those decoys could well make up a large percentage of these drones. We don't know. There is a third flavor of these drones that they're manufacturing in Russia, and that's a reconnaissance/attack drone. So it can be used as a one-way attack drone with its own munitions, but it can also do reconnaissance and return to base if it's used strictly in a reconnaissance fashion. So we don't, honestly, I can't say certainly what percentage of those 135 drones last night were decoys, attack, and or reconnaissance. So I hope that answers that question, Bip, or Veer. I don't know. Anyway, so Melly asked the question, what do you mean 12,000 North Korean troops? I thought I heard 2,000. It appears that at this time, there are between 2,000 and 3,000 North Koreans already in Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, and Donetsk, around Mariupol. There are 3 training bases. Now, these guys appear to be artillery engineers. The best reporting that we have, and based on GUR sources, claim that the Russians have established 3 North Korean training bases in and around Mariupol, where the bulk of these forces are, and that their function here is to fine-tune Russian artillery for the delivery of North Korean munitions. So we know that the North Koreans have already sold the Russians probably 5 million 152 millimeter artillery shells, and that the Russians have complained to the North Koreans that they have about a 50% dud rate. So it appears that several thousand munitions engineers are already in country working with the Russians to improve that dud rate and improve the accuracy and execution of the North Korean ammunition. Then there's the 12,000, what South Korea is saying is likely close to 12,000 troops that are in the far east of Russia currently being trained by the Russian military. So remember, if you follow the channel, You may remember that we had a story last June that there was construction going on at air bases, some of them formerly abandoned air bases in Russia's Far East. And we didn't know what they were being rebuilt for. There was the suggestion being made that they would house North Korean workers who would come to Russia to help with manufacturing, defense industry contracts, right? Just labor force, migrant workers loaned from North Korea. Well, now it appears that their intent is to train them up as soldiery for the front line. Okay. So to the best of my knowledge, that's what's happening with North Korea. That's what happened with last night's drone attack. And that's the summary of Mark Rutte's comments following the NATO defense ministers' meeting. I want to move on to the big question, the nuclear question. When I was a kid, growing up in the 80s, I used to have dreams all the time of my life with me and a few friends who were the only survivors of an atomic war. And we were struggling for survival in a post-apocalyptic landscape. It was my greatest fear growing up. We found out in the mid-'80s that we lived within 12 miles of a Soviet first strike target. The Tobyhanna Army Depot was a Soviet first strike target. When we think, I have often said that when we think about the frustration and the frustrating nature of the drip, drip, drip of Western support, particularly American support, of the broken promises, the unfulfilled expectations. Sure, Ukraine, here's 2 Patriot batteries. We'll get you 2 Patriot batteries, right? That's what America said 6 months ago. Where the fuck are they? How frustrating must it be? Think about it yourself. I know for me, one of the great reliefs I had when I finally divorced my ex-wife was that I would no longer have to suffer not knowing whether or not she was going to fulfill the promises she had made. My life and my son's life was a constant disappointment with my ex-wife because she would say, oh yes, I'll have our son there to his birthday party by 1 o'clock. It won't be a problem. And then never showing up. And I'm there with her family, our friends, and no baby. That kind of constant disappointment, being with a partner who never fulfills the promises that they say they will fulfill, is the most frustrating experience in the world. And very often we decide, as I did when I divorced her, that I would be better off alone and not have those unfulfilled promises in my life. Many of you may have experienced similar things. Now just imagine that you are experiencing that frustration on a national scale and you are watching the enemy murder your citizens day in and day out while you wait. That is the kind of feeling, the kind of betrayal that the Ukrainians are really beginning to feel that the West has done to them. And now today, Zelensky made some comments, and this is what I want to say about these comments. You are going to see lots of reports. You are going to see lots of headlines that say, Zelensky gives ultimatum to the West. Either let us join NATO or give us nukes. That is not what he said. I cannot stress to you in the strongest terms that headline, in my opinion, is wildly inaccurate and a misrepresentation of the president's comments today. If you watch the entire, hey, Bobby, fool me once, shame on me, or shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Sorry. That was a side note to my buddy Bobby. Okay. Now look. What if you listen to the entire press briefing with Zelensky today, and you see it through the lens, as I have to every single day in this country, of a person whose first language is Ukrainian, second language, third language for him, fourth language for him is English, right? I don't believe that that was his intent or what he said at all. What I think he was saying, what I think he meant was, look, we had this Budapest memoranda. We had the expectation, right? And Ethan, that's exactly why I'm talking about this, pal. Because I know that that headline is going to be pushed today. And it is not accurate. It is not accurate. Here's what I believe. I think it's not accurate. Here's what I believe he was saying. He was giving us all a history lesson. He was reminding us that at the time, back in 94, right, when Ukraine surrendered its nukes, it knew it needed nukes, or it needed to be part of an effective alliance. And the only effective alliance it knows that any of us know is NATO. And so Ukraine chose NATO. And now here we are 30 years later, and Ukraine is still not in NATO. When are those unfulfilled expectations of the Ukrainian people and the Kyiv government going to be fulfilled? Why is a German solution impossible for Ukraine, right? Remember West Germany, East Germany, and West Germany was in NATO? Why is that solution so impossible for Ukraine? Why can't it have that solution? And in my mind, it's a perfectly workable solution, you know? At any rate, I think those are my major comments on the confusion about what was said today. I think he went on to make the point that Ukrainians are increasingly disillusioned. The expectation that Russia won't honor their agreements is a normal thing for Ukrainians to expect. But it is not a normal thing for Ukrainians to expect NATO not to meet its obligations. And they are disappointed that NATO is failing to honor those agreements. This country is tired. They have been at war with an enemy who has every advantage for the last nearly 3 years now. They have lost nearly half the population, either to the war or to emigration, as millions have fled this country. This was a country of just over 40 million. It's now estimated between 22 and 25 million. Nearly half the population is fled or dead. They can't survive that way. They can't survive that way. Pardon me. Oh, that's a little ginger skin. I wondered what that was. I put a little ginger in my tea. I don't know if Rational Squirrel is here, but if Rational Squirrel is here, this is that Cleopatra's Knight Lavare you got me. Thank you so much. When Rational Squirrel was here, that was a little gift. And I enjoy it on a daily basis. So this question of nukes for Ukraine, Ukraine has never said that they wanted nukes. Ukraine used to be the technological and defense center of the USSR. They've got 4 nuclear power plants. They are loaded with nuclear scientists and have a source of uranium. They build their own fucking rockets. If they wanted nukes, they could have them. Make no mistake. That's not even, that's not a debatable point. The technical know-how and the resources to make and build them are all here. That is the reality on the ground. However, when we think about the drip, drip, drip of Western support, I have often suggested that it was because of the West's fear of nuclear escalation, that Russia's bluffing about nukes is what holds us back. And I have based that on what I believe to be a prejudice in the established diplomatic corps that sort of favors Russia as a partner, right? A dangerous partner, but a partner nonetheless. It has come to my attention. I don't know that this had been reported before this. But in Bob Woodward's new book, War, he quotes a transcript that he claims to have gotten his hands on of a call between Lloyd Austin and Sergei Shoigu, the defense secretary for the Russian Federation, from October of 2022. In October of 2022, the United States believed that it had credible evidence that Russia was preparing to use a tactical nuke. This was in the late summer, early fall of 2022, when the Thunder Runs in Kyiv had liberated 20,000 square kilometers of the country from the Russian aggressor. And the Ukrainian army was then marching on Kherson and would soon free that city from the Russian occupiers. In light of the defeats on the battlefield, having been expulsed from Kyiv, having been pushed out of Kharkiv, and then threatening the loss of the single regional capital that Russia had, it appears that Russia may have been preparing to nuke the forces approaching Kherson City. At least those in the administration believed that to be true. So Lloyd Austin gets on the horn to Sergei Shoigu, and he tells Shoigu that if they use a nuke, quote, expect the most dire consequences, end quote. Shoigu responds, quote, I don't like to be threatened. To which Lloyd Austin, his badass self, responds, quote, Sir, I command the most powerful army in the history of the human race. I do not make threats. Ooh, chilling, chilling. I do love that Lloyd Austin. He's got class, baby. He's really got class. Now, maybe you don't now look, it appears to me, whether Putin was bluffing or not, that senior administration officials believed the threat was real. And you know as well as I do, we got eyes in the sky. The Russians can't take a shit without the Americans knowing about it, let alone pull a nuclear warhead out of storage and screw it on a missile and target someplace else. It's not going to happen, right? Without us knowing about it. But let's say that you don't believe it. Let's say that none of that, you don't think any of that ever happened. What do we know for sure happened right after this? November 4th of 2022, Xi Jinping warns Russia publicly not to go nuclear in this conflict. Less than a month later, December of 2022, Narendra Modi of India cancels for the first time, except COVID, the 22nd annual Russia-India conference which was a high-level leadership conference that Russia and India has been hosting since 2000, cancels the 22nd annual conference and publicly warns Putin not to go nuclear. Now, it appears from Bob Woodward's reporting that senior administration officials in the Biden administration reached out to and recruited the Indians and the Chinese to put pressure on Putin not to go nuclear, which it appears they did. Right, the timeline on this, it all makes perfect sense. Now, something I missed completely, and you guys know I try to pay attention, was in March of 2024, there's a CNN reporter by the name of Jim Scudo, something like that, Jim Scudo, or Jim Scavuto. He published a book called The Return of the Great Powers. And in this book, he cites senior Biden administration officials who claim that credible evidence in the time leading up to the loss of Kherson City and the Kharkiv Oblast, Russians were ready to stop the Ukrainian advance with a tactical nuclear device. Now look, was Putin bluffing? Was the administration fooled? Maybe he was. Maybe they were. If that's true, then Putin won a great victory because it has led to us deterring ourselves ever since. It has led to slow support for Ukraine. It has led to a drip of support. We have self-deterred in our support for Ukraine. We have drip-fed support, limited Ukrainian response by restricting their use of weapons, given Putin time to breathe and recruit the other members of autocratic nations to fund, finance, and fuel his war here, as well as the time to expand it, to draw in the North Koreans, to draw in the Iranians, to leverage Hamas in Israel and create chaos in the Middle East, threatening the shipping of goods through the Suez Canal by arming the Houthis, driving up the price of oil for no one's benefit but himself and his insane desire to destroy the world if he cannot possess it. My son doesn't suffer the nuclear fears that I suffered as a kid because the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty kept us, put the whole nuclear war issue kind of on the back burner. We felt like we had it under control. Now, the genie is out of the bottle again. Make no mistake. And Putin's threats and the threats that we hear from Russia. Oh, I forgot to mention, remember back at that time, the time of the Kherson advance, Russia was making noise about Ukraine using a dirty bomb on its own territory. It's believed by senior administration officials that Russia's plan was to detonate the tactical nuke and then blame the Ukrainians for putting off a dirty bomb. And in the confusion, as the radioactive dust settled, it would take so long to determine the truth of it that they were prepared to do it. That is what they believed. Now, again, I personally don't think we have any reason to believe anything that Putin's ever said. We have good reason, in fact, to distrust the things he says. But administration officials did believe it. When they say that they had credible evidence, could it be that they had satellite photos of nukes coming out of storage? Remember, at that time, Putin was also screwing the warheads off of short-range missiles and then lobbing the missiles at Ukraine just to try to exhaust air defense like they're doing with these decoy drones. Could it be that the movement of those nuclear devices, and maybe just even lobbing the empty missiles at Ukraine, was to cover the fact that they were in fact moving nukes? So at any rate, looking at international news, Zelensky says that any Western efforts or any Western officials that are discussing NATO membership as a trade or in exchange for territorial concessions are doing so without the input of Ukraine and need to broach this matter with Kyiv and put this idea on the table before the Ukrainian people. So I don't know that anybody is having this discussion, but it seems like Zelensky might have caught wind that some folks are having this discussion privately, and he has called them out on it. If you're going to try to trade away our land, put it on the table, is what he's saying. According to Budanov, Russia will have 11,000 North Korean soldiers ready to fight in Ukraine by November the 1st. So 10 days, basically 10 days from now. The video that I saw, some of the videos of the North Koreans, of what appear to be North Korean soldiers at the Vladivostok training facility. Oh, I forget the channel that it was published on originally, but Invaders Must Die Telegram channel featured it as well. That's the one, Mel, you sent me. Maybe if you know the Telegram channel you got it off, you could post that for everybody too. But it looked like they were getting ready to move out. It looked like they were ready to begin that 11,000-mile trip or whatever it is from Vladivostok to the front line here. U.S. sanctions 2 Chinese drone companies for supplying lethal aid to Russia in its war against Ukraine. According to Matthew Miller, State Department spokesperson, he said, "This is the first time we actually saw a Chinese company manufacturing a weapon itself that was then used in the battlefield by Russia." End quote. So we've seen the Chinese slip lots of things around the back door. But we haven't seen is them actually selling weapons to Ukraine, or I'm sorry, selling weapons to Russia. But according to Matthew Miller, we now have evidence that they are. That's why earlier when I said this axis of evil of Moscow, Pyongyang, Tehran, I included Beijing, because increasingly I think we're going to have to. That is the way that World War III is lining up, guys. Make no mistake. That's what we're talking about here. Wall Street Journal reports that U.S. F-16 training program is going to shift focus to younger pilots. This is of concern because it will extend the training period for as long as an additional year, impacting battlefield readiness. Currently, Ukraine is not likely to have even a full squadron of F-16s until summer of 2025. On the subject of delays and frustration, the F-16s are probably the poster child for all of us. The ISW reports that weather is slowing everything down in Kursk already. Now, in the next week, we're going to see overnight temps all up and down the contact line fall to near zero, well, about 40 Fahrenheit. But no rain is in the forecast. No rain is in the forecast, but it's going to get cold. In terms of turning to military aid, Germany announced a new package, including 20 Martyrs, 8 Leopards, air defense, artillery and ammo, mine clearing, and additional ordnance. The Canadians are coming through with a $47 million package that includes firearms, ammo, and protective equipment like flak jackets. In a joint press briefing with President Zelensky, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced a $40 billion military aid package for Ukraine. This was at the Defense Ministers' Conference in Brussels. He reiterated the irreversible path Now, see, again, there's that word, the irreversible path for Ukraine into NATO. GBW, we just spent a half hour talking about North Korean involvement in Ukraine. Sorry you got here late, pal. The recording of this will be posted on YouTube and the Peters Peeps public group on Facebook. He reiterated the irreversible path of Ukraine into NATO. Again, Zelensky knows that, and I think he believes it. He wants to believe that the path is irreversible. So again, I don't think that he was making an ultimatum. He wasn't saying, give us nukes or put us in NATO. He wasn't saying that. He was saying, that's our history, and we chose NATO. But despite reiterating this, Rutte gave no timetable for that. Rutte went on to say that the growing alignment of authoritarian actors like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran is undermining the stability of the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions. In light of this growing instability, Indo-Pac leadership was invited to participate for the first time in NATO history at the defense ministers' meeting. So not only was NATO at the NATO defense ministers' meeting this week, but the defense ministers of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand were there as well for the very first time in NATO history. You know, American conservatives and Trumpists especially will often say that our real enemy is China and we should be focused on the security of Taiwan, not Ukraine. That's a European problem, let the Europeans deal with it. But the official position of the Taiwanese government is that the best thing we can do for Taiwan is support Ukraine. Because they know that if Russia is soundly defeated here, that if Beijing sees that the West has the resolve, the resources, and the courage of its own convictions to defeat Russia here in Ukraine, we are likely to do the same thing if Beijing were to attack Taiwan. It's the best lesson we could teach Moscow and Beijing, is to defeat Putin here in Ukraine. Greece became the 25th country to sign a bilateral security agreement, heightening, in my mind, the near universal support for this emergent democracy fighting for its life, as opposed to the Russians, who depend on two pariah states and one state interested only in its own welfare. The Kyiv Independent reports that Denmark has announced its 21st military aid package to Ukraine, $350 million. They're using a weapons drawdown, so they'll pull stocks from their own weapons like RPDA in the U.S. They contributed money for air defense systems with Germany. I think Belgium and Norway are part of that consortium as well, that are buying a bunch of stuff for Ukraine. Make a contribution to the International Fund for Ukraine, and expansion of UAF training is how those funds will be used. The ISW is citing Russian sources in reporting that Nikita Klenkov, 44 years old, was gunned down outside his Moscow home. This guy was a high-ranking GRU officer and deputy commander of the Special Operations Forces Training Center. Surprisingly, the Kremlin is not implicating Ukraine or Ukrainian partisans. They are not blaming the West. They are treating this like a homicide investigation. Now, there could be two reasons for that. They could be concerned that the Kursk incursion is giving the public the idea that there's Ukrainians behind every tree, that we are not safe, that we are invaded. And they don't want to give the public the idea that Ukraine is capable of assassinating a high-ranking GRU officer in the heart of Moscow. Or it could be that he was taken out by his fellow officers for some other reason, or that it was a gangland hit because of some corruption, right? But at any rate, they are not pointing the finger. Very unusually, they are not pointing the finger at Ukraine. We continue to learn of Russian acts of sabotage. Last night, I detailed the DHL plane in Leipzig, where a package burst into flames before it was loaded on the plane, rather than at altitude. The director of MI6 has reported that the same thing happened in Birmingham, England, that a parcel caught fire before being loaded on a cargo plane. If that incendiary device had gone off at altitude, there is no telling. Now, it is important to note, these were incendiary devices made to cause a fire, not to blow up. Still, any fire at altitude poses the risk of a crash. That means that hundreds, if not thousands, of lives of people on the ground are at risk. The suggestion is being made that it's possible that the Russians are using these devices to test the security systems before the actual bombs, before they try to fly the actual bombs. If that's the case, they are doing so with a brazen disregard for human life. Because if any of these devices went off at altitude, there is no telling what would happen from the resulting cabin fire. Even if it's just testing the waters, this has already affected security protocols in the West. Many European countries had abandoned the policy of preventing people from taking water bottles on a plane, right? How many times have you gone to get on a flight and you have to throw your fucking water bottle out because there's no liquids on the plane, right? Well, many European countries dispensed with that over, say, the last 2 years. Suddenly, those restrictions have been reimposed, and now I think we know why. Donetsk Regional Prosecutor's Office alleges that Russians summarily executed a wounded Ukrainian POW in New York. There's a town in Ukraine called New York. And this is yet another example of a summary of the Russians taking no prisoners. It increasingly appears that that is now Russian policy, not a one-off rogue commander, because we are seeing it all up and down the line, from Koronovo and Kursk to Kherson. Finally, is Clay here? Clay, you might appreciate this. You know, over the last couple of weeks, the Zed bloggers have been all, yeah, PT, you can spell it that way if you want, but whatever. It's New York. Anyway, Russian Zed bloggers and propagandists have been making videos basically begging the Kremlin for warm winter clothes and socks. At the same time, some Russian commander is using mannequins as scarecrows, basically. He's put all these mannequins dressed as soldiers outside of his command post in an effort, we think, to draw Ukrainian fire away from his command position, right? The only thing is, these dummies are dressed in these beautiful down camo jackets and these heavy winter like ski pants, thermal pants. They are literally these dummies that are there to draw Ukrainian fire away from some fucking commander sitting on his ass in the rear, are better dressed than the actual troops on the front. It's so insanely absurd and stupid. It's post-irony is what it is. All right. Guys, I really want to thank Tatiana, who I don't know, but I wish I did. Tatiana, if you're out there anywhere, let me know what your TikTok handle is so I can thank you appropriately. And I want to thank the mods, best moderators on the Tickety Talk, Cheyenne, Vanetta, PTJ, and Travis. I want to thank Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces, where these lives get posted afterward. And I also want to thank Vanetta, who has the Google Doc share, where you can get email message templates for all things related to Ukrainian needs for Congress, the Senate, and the White House. And big thanks to Lars, who has the Discord server and the Alexievich archives. Right, exactly. Ukrainian drone operators have already learned to identify dummies from the battlefield just by switching to IR. You switch to infrared, there's no heat signature, right? You know they're not alive. It's dumb. But the Russians are living in the 19th century. Their tactics are 19th century. Their execution is 19th century. Their outlook is 19th century. They live in a world where they think they have no freedom because the people in charge have denied it to them for so long. Hey, Shrimp Man, long time no see. So, guys, we have a few minutes left here. I'm sorry it's so short, but if there's questions, I can stay a little late today. It's about 5 to 1 here. The government is 19th century, Paul. Yes, it is. You have told this good Peter, I'm following you from Norway. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We have too many Norwegians following us already. We're at our limit for Norwegians. Welcome aboard, Nevison. Hey, Flip. Good night, brother. Give the wife my best. Night, Chef Deb. That's it, Arn, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know. And if you have only lived in a world of abuse, in a world where you are thought to be a disposable commodity, how do you learn to think of yourself as anything else? Hey, effing hell. Yeah, one of your countrymen, Lars. Arn, I was joking. This is just a joke. Like you could have too many Norwegians. Who thinks that way? Exactly, PT. Right on, bro. Approximate number of drones sent last night, 135. Now, again, how many of them were decoys? We don't know. Masanius Rufus. Well, you're welcome, Rufus. Thank you. Thank you, Pursuit Ventures. Remember, I am live at 5, or whatever time zone you're in this time, Monday through Friday, virtually every week. Trump is dementing before our eyes. Oh, Bobby, you're not kidding. You see some of these comments. Oh, thanks, Dive Hard. You always make me feel pretty. Trump is dementing before our eyes. Man, did you see that town hall in PA where he stood on stage swaying to Ave Maria 3 times? Weird. Knowledge is power. Paul Molman made the comment recently that and I don't want to misquote you here, Paul, and I don't want to hurt myself patting myself on the back by quoting you. But I do find it to be true. Paul Molman identified the folks that listen to this live as what he called high information users. And I have to say, I find that to be accurate. I get so many like Mel today, sending me that link to the video. Now, that was a video I had seen, but if I hadn't seen it, I would have been very interested in that, right? I had a guy the other day mention that the hits on the arsenals, the Toropets arsenal, occurred at the time that they were loading and unloading munitions. That the attack was timed for a time, and I hadn't even thought of that. But when I look back at the report I gave, I showed you guys the 5 destroyed trains, that there were trains in every one of those arsenals. So of course it was timed for that. So it was a listener who pointed out that the Baba Yagas can't lift a stupid dragon's teeth. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you, all of you guys that make those kinds of contributions to the conversation. You, all of you guys that make those kinds of contributions to the conversation. Rational Squirrel, we have an email message template to Congress, the Senate, and the White House urging a no-fly zone west of the Dnipro. We have a letter just for that. So get that and send it to your representatives. Yep, Bobby, and I hear that they're wrecking havoc in the Russian rear up in Kursk, that's what they're using them for up there now. So now, guys, I would mention a couple of people have made some donations to help get me to Venezia, which is a trip that I want to take for a number of reasons. One of them, of course, is it's time for me to start getting out of Kyiv. I've been here for 18 months, safe as one can be in this country, relatively secure as one can be in this country. But it limits my understanding of the war. It limits what you see of the war. And I think that if this channel is going to continue to grow, if I'm going to continue to grow as somebody, I don't want to say as a journalist, because I'm not a journalist, right? I'm an amateur. But if I want to expand the view of the war for you, I got to start getting out of Kyiv. I got to go to the other places where things are really happening. The trip to Kharkiv opened my eyes to a new world. The trip to Odessa opened my eyes to a new world. And there's much more of that to see. And thank you, Weibo. I appreciate that. And this upcoming trip to Venezia is going to open my eyes to another world. And I will share that with you. Fitz, how far it is, I don't know. The bus ride is 3 hours and 47 minutes. I've already looked at the bus. Vanetta and Rob Martin bought my bus tickets. They made some contributions last week. You and Tatiana, your contributions will go toward the hotel. I basically just need a little budget for food and taxis while I'm there, and that trip is all done. Oh, no, I got that today. Chris Carter sent it. Hell yeah. Chris Carter, good man. No, so the Venezia trip is essentially paid for. No, I do have that. So that's not going to be where the next round of funding goes. I guess the next round of funding will have to go toward the rent. But anyway, Venezia, I'm hoping the next live comedy show will be next Saturday, the 26th. And so that following week, I hope to go to Venezia. I think, Arn, That's a great question. Arn says, what do you need to make it a good trip? What I need is a contact in Venezia who can show me around. Now, I think I have one, but it's always better to get distinct perspectives. So if anybody has an English-speaking friend in Venezia who's got a car, who would show me around, show me the places that got hit, tell me their stories of how they've survived, what's happened to them, don't hesitate to send their contact information to me or have them get in touch with me. In terms of cash, I mean, basically with Chris Carter's very generous donation today, I think I have all the cash I need, Arn, for the Venezia trip. But it will not be the last trip. There will be more coming. And so anybody that can help to fund any of that, the PayPal is in the description, or better yet, guys, do me a favor. Sign up to the Patreon, right? And, you know, if you can do $50 a month, if 5 people did that, that would ensure a trip every single month, pretty much. Pretty much. So, Arn, I appreciate the thought, man, and I assure you I will put to good use anything that you can kick in. Yeah, you know, Fitz, I really didn't think about it. I really thought that just being here, living with Ukrainians, working with Ukrainians every day would... why don't I work? Why don't I work? You know, the idea that work is only when you sell your time to somebody else is bullshit. I spend hours every day crafting this live, and I think it shows. I think increasingly it shows. Those videos that I make, they don't get made by themselves. They require research. Truthful, you're right. You're right. I'm sorry. But here's the thing, guys. All of you who are in the Patreon, I feel like I work for you. Like the fact that there are 100 people in the world, 100 people in the world that literally support me is the most humbling thing that's ever happened to me. How many people can say that you've got 100 people that support you and your efforts? And I do this because I believe it. I believe that this is the most important thing happening on Earth right now. And it is in all of our interest to understand it. I do this because I believe that I am learning things that will help us in the United States, that I am learning every day from the Ukrainians, what it is to have Russia as our enemy and what it means and what we have to do about it. Thank you, V. It is funny, though, you know, having grown up Catholic, there is a lot of guilt in your life. And I sometimes feel that way, right? So, guys, Patreon folks, look, watch the Patreon because there's more videos coming. And if you support this channel, but you can't afford to support this channel, don't worry about it. My Patreon channel is open to free accounts. So please get a Patreon account and join the Patreon. Thank you, Weibo. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Now, you know, Jedi makes a point there. Jedi says, don't make us come and get you out of trouble. For a long time, I have hesitated to leave Kyiv because I do not want to be in the way. I don't have any medical training. I don't have any military training. The last thing that I want is for some Ukrainian medic to have to make a decision between working on me and working on somebody else should we come under fire. The idea that some Ukrainian defender might die because I got attention is not something I want to have to live with. So I'm not talking about going to the contact line. I'm not talking about going to the front line. I'm talking about going out and about in Ukraine and hearing the stories. Lots of this country was occupied and no longer is. The people there have stories. Those stories will help us to understand what Ukraine is, what it needs, and what it may be yet in the future. That's my take. Dive hard, that would make me the happiest motherfucker in the world. A do not resuscitate t-shirt. I love it. Johnny, I think so. Because it's the stories that make the difference. I have a flak jacket. I mean, if I were ever going someplace where I would need it, I do have a flak jacket. Everybody has a story. You guys, oh man, I wish I had more time. Like, there are so many things I want to do. The Faces of Ukraine series on Instagram. It's such a good series. Vanetta loves it and pushes it all the time. But when I did the Faces of Ukraine series, I talked to this girl who escaped from Crimea, traveled 2,200 miles to Moscow, Minsk, and then to the Belarusian border, back into Ukraine, her and her cat, to escape the Russian occupation of Crimea. Thanks, Bobby. I mean, this young girl, like 89 pounds soaking wet, her and the cat 2,200 miles through Russia to escape. Pretty impressive. And then you know what she did when she got here? She went to the work for the, I'm going to get it wrong now, but it translates as something like the Crimean Freedom Program or something like that. But what they do is they help people escape from Crimea. Which one was that? It's the only one where there's a picture of the cat. She has one of those British blues, and she sent me a picture of her cat. And it's the only Faces of Ukraine that includes a cat. I apologize. I can't even think of her name right now, V. I mean, they're all named Tatiana or Irina or... It might be Tatiana. Again, I don't know who the Tatiana is who sponsored tonight's live, but I really want to thank her. And if we figure out what her TikTok handle is, I'll let you know and we can all say thanks. But at any rate. All right, kids. Any final questions? Any final thoughts? Good night, milady. Good night, Bobby. Good night, Cheyenne. Big thanks to the moderators, guys. She actually, PT, now it's interesting, they do it differently, right? But she spells her name T-E-T, which I've seen before, T-E-T, Tetiana. Hey, Jason Willis Starn, how you doing, pal? Well, RDG, you got any questions before we close it out? I'll be happy to answer them if I can. Will it matter if Trump wins? Hell yeah, it'll matter if Trump wins. Thanks, Kaz. Nice to see F in hell. Thanks for liking the live, everybody. Victory is coming, Arn. I think so. I hope so. Night, Sarah. What are the opinions of Kamala from people in Ukraine? Freedom, FDL. I'm going to call you FDL. Dude, for any topic, there are as many opinions in Ukraine as there are people. You know, it really is that simple. I haven't really had a lot of conversations about Kamala Harris from people, with people rather, other than they prefer her to Trump. That is the best that I have so far. Kamala Harris can manage the task of Ukraine, absolutely. At the very least, hey, John, in the UK, at the very least, she'll just continue Biden's policies. But I don't think that's her. I don't think that's her style. I think we will see a much stronger support for Ukraine, a much clearer vision for Ukraine's future from Kamala Harris than we do from the current administration. The current administration, I think, is trying to save the country from an imminent coup by the maggots. And I think that they are so focused on just trying to save American democracy that they have very little time and effort left for the rest of the world. But if Kamala gets in, she'll have the bandwidth. If the American people soundly refute Trump and Trumpism at the ballot box this November, I think she'll have the flexibility to function. Now, if it's a squeak, if she only wins by a squeak, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem, and that's what Trump is counting on. He knows he's not going to win. He's not even trying anymore. He's counting on the violence afterwards of a near win. What is an old-fashioned? I don't know what an old-fashioned is, actually. But I think you can see the tea bag. Rational Squirrel, this is that Cleopatra's Night that you gave me. Well, the UN is useless in this case, Louisa, because the Russians have a Security Council veto, which they stole from the other 14 members of the Soviet Union, because that seat is supposed to be a Soviet seat, not a Russian seat. That's what an old-fashioned is. Okay. I don't drink bourbon. Yeah, and I put some lemon and ginger in it. Some fresh ginger root and some lemon. How many days left now? If you're talking about to the election, Nikita, I think we're down to 17. 17. Okay, kids. Again, look, it's only because so many of you are in the Patreon. So many of you sponsor lives with the PayPal in the description that I can be here for you, right? I am here for you because you are here for me. So I want you to know I really appreciate it. And I hope my work shows. The response, the way you guys piled on that dude made me very happy. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Good night.